Welcome to Podcash, the portable professional development podcast from Cash Alumni. Cash Alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Let's jump in to this week's episode.
I've never met you before because you've been talking to my colleague Janet, but we have got some cool stuff that we're going to share on Cash Alumni, which is, I suppose, the purpose of this podcast is to get some nice stuff together to help to share the courses and the stuff that we can help our audience to find of yours. So could you start by telling our audience who you are and what it is you do, and then we'll chat around interesting things like outdoor learning and stuff from there. Is that all right?
Yeah, no, sure. So I'm Helen Bilton. I'm Professor of Outdoor Learning and Play. Started life as a trained teacher. So my family we were very interested in politics or education, and and in part, I suppose, why cash is so important to me and things like the Open University. My granddad was very keen on education, that this was the way out, sort of like of poverty, and he was in poverty and he did achieve. So my mum was very passionate about politics and education, and so you either went into politics or you went into education. And so I went into education, and I was really lucky. The first lecture I had was on the nursery garden from a lady called Jackie Brunner, and I was just taken by this. Absolutely fantastic. And so her love of outdoor play and the nursery garden was the start of my love of outdoor play. And I've kind of not looked back, and I did my master's dissertation on it and I did my PhD on it, and I've just researched, I've written books, I've written articles. And I suppose the first book I wrote in 1998 was because there was nothing out there that really explained what it was, what this thing was called outdoor play. So I tried to synthesize kind of all the ideas to do with it, and from thence came more picture books, because I realised that some of the stuff that were coming in sort of 2000 onwards weren't as knowledgeable about outdoors. And I thought, let's try it, because a picture can tell 1,000 words, so it's kind of like, well, let's do some more picture-y books. Yeah, and so it goes on.
That's really interesting. I'm a bit jealous because I only really just discovered my love of the outdoors in my 30s, hence the chicken. But what is it about outdoor play that is so magical?
Wow. I suppose the first thing is that children, you can see them just go, and people go, you know, you say step outside, let's just step outside, and people go, it's a kind of, I suppose I call it a can-do environment. So children, the trouble with the home is that parents generally control it. Schools and classes, teachers control them and own them, but nobody actually owns outside. So you can see children go, yeah, no, I'm okay, and nobody's going to judge me, nobody's going to assess me. So there was a big piece of work from Tizard in 1979, which I was really taken by, where she found that where you assess children outside, they actually were more capable than when you assess them inside. So I suppose that's the first thing. So it's just a place where children can be themselves. It's, thinking about your the charity, it's about health, it's about education, it's about care, it's about everything. And I'm often saying to people, why not go outside? Why do we have to still keep kind of trying to prove it? At the minute, it's really important to appreciate the the natural world, even more so than ever. And outside, you can appreciate the natural world and you can get to know it and love it, but you have to be out there to really love it and know it. And I still marvel. I was looking at it's crazy because we've got things like, begonias out still, which we shouldn't have. But, you look at a flower the fungi are really prominent at the minute. And I just look at them and I go, what a buzz. It's just shapes, textures, colours, just extraordinary. Yeah, so it's just, I love it. Hard to express it in a few words.
And you say that you still feel like you still have to keep explaining it, or suppose trying to prove that it's magic, or that there's all of these benefits to being outside. And do you think that's because when people think about outdoor learning, they think about someone dressed like me standing in the middle of the woods banging on a tambourine, and they think about it being this very hippy dippy let's just play outside thing, rather than actually all of the evidence proving that, I suppose, children are more able to handle risk and actually learn lots of things much faster.
I hadn't thought about hippy dippies at all. I think one reason is that outdoors still kind of has to be proved is because we see education as only happening within a walls and a ceiling. When nursery education was set up in 1914 in Deptford in England, it was as a reaction to the really harsh education that people of 5+ were receiving, where it was inside, it was rote learning, it was strict and unkind. And the Macmillans, said no, but there's a better way to do things. And children can easily learn outside, and you need experiences, like Dewey says. Dewey says, don't give children something to learn, give them something to do, and from that doing they will learn. So no, I don't. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, and I've never been dismissive of people who don't feel able to work outside. I think there's a fear. I think people think there's something, I'm really angry at the minute because I think people are perceiving there's certain organisations that are suggesting you need a qualification to work outside. No, you don't. It's ridiculous. So there's this kind of sense of not understanding it, knowing it, and actually it's much more simple than you think. I say to people, what did you... And I don't always get answers because now younger people won't have necessarily had lots of experience outside. But when you were outside, what did you do? And people say, I rode bikes, I climbed trees, I made perfume out of petals and water. And they smile and they look happy. And what it's about is doing, being physically active, being in a healthy environment, talking to people, learning to get on with other people. So it's this kind of really holistic experience. But I don't blame people if they don't get that. I just try and help people get it, and it's not as scary as they think. But the important thing to have is the right clothing. You must have the right clothing for outside. You've got to, like today, I've got 2 pairs of socks on. You've got to have a coat, you've got to have gloves. When it's sunny, you've got to have long sleeve t-shirts, you've got to, have a hat with a cover over the neck. And I think that's something that at the minute we really are needing to try and sort out, that people have lost sight of the need for appropriate clothing dependent on the weather. And then, of course, some families don't even have the money for that. I mean, I am writing an article, I'm wondering about just putting in it, actually, the government needs to make sure that people have got the funds to buy the right clothing.
Yeah. And do you think that the reason maybe that we don't have the right clothing anymore is that we try always not to be outside? We try to avoid, I suppose, being in situations where we can't control our levels of comfort. Like we want to be warm and comfortable all the time. We don't want to be in an environment where we don't get to pick the lighting or how it sounds or, you know, how it feels underfoot or any of those things.
Very true. Yeah. I think we've got too comfortable. And we've got too comfortable if you're in a place that's very hot and you have air conditioning. And we've got too comfortable if you're in a place where it's cold and you want heating on. So, I mean, when I was a child, we didn't have heating. You had a fire in the front room and you belted like anything upstairs with your hot water bottle and got in bed as fast as possible to stay warm. So, yeah, I think we've lost sight. I think the car brings its own problems in that people, you see it. People dash into the car. If they've got children, they dash the children into the car. They then drive to the school. They sort of chuck the children out. So many schools and settings are now saying children aren't coming to school with a coat or gloves or hat or the right clothing for outdoors.
Because they're just going to the car.
Yeah.
And how do schools deal with that? Like if people aren't sending kids with coats, does that then mean that schools lose even the autonomy for like break times? Like what happens even at playtime when you go into the yard and you have time that is just yours? Like how do you deal with that then?
Well, some schools will insist, and if people can't afford, they will have boxes of wellies and coats and gloves and things like that. I think it's where schools are effective with parents is they've told the parents, right, this is the way we are, this is our ethos, and one of the things associated with this ethos is that we will go outside every day, and these are the things you will need to do that. And the reason we're going outside, it isn't just to have a free-for-all, which playtime can be. I think other schools may just ignore it and just children get cold, which is awful, or get overheated. So there's a kind of, there's a real important, in schools and settings there is education, but there's an incredibly important aspect called care, and they go hand in hand. So that's my experiences of how schools are dealing with it. Yeah.
And what do you think that like barrier is in terms of like getting outside, or it just being like part of our normal, like other than that comfort and that, like, is there a reason that you feel like you have to keep explaining it? Like, is there something that people just don't understand, or that just doesn't click? Is there a
I think there is the comfort, and it has got worse. So people just want to be comfortable, and have lost sight of the fact that if you're cold, well, you're going to have to take the things off that are cold, because there's no point in putting more socks on if your feet are cold, because all you're doing is insulating cold. And I think some of the kind of basic healthcare ideas may have been lost. What you have to do is take your socks off, warm your feet up, put some different socks if you're lucky to do that. I think so there's that aspect. I also think that people overcomplicate outside, and I've talked to parents where they felt embarrassed, and I think because we don't teach much child development, particularly in teacher education now, it's minute, the amount of child development, but parents can get anxious about the behaviour of their children outside. So you're on show if you're outside. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a mum and two children at a bus stop, and the children just naturally learn they just play. They're just delightful. So the two of them are racing around this bus stop and then racing around the other way. Now, as a parent or a carer, you've got to be careful that they don't come off the pavement. But they weren't. Yeah, they were fine, and there was quite a big gap behind the bus stop where they were kind of sort of messing about and stuff. But she stopped them, and you could sense that she was embarrassed. And it was so sad because they were fine. There were heart-lung exercise going. They were smiling. They were having fun. It was joyous. Yeah, and I mean, and I've, when you've got a youngster, when you've got a 1.5-year-old, you can spend 20 minutes on, 20 meters of ground because the child is exploring. But people, I think, have lost sight of the importance of that, or lost understanding of things like that, because the education system can be it is so exam orientated and end goal orientated. So, over the and I understand that, back in the 80s there was this sense that something needed to be done about education, and the Callaghan, debate in 1976. That's fine, but I think we really need a definite rethink of education, so that people can say and explain, no, it's okay. Don't worry about your child wanting to spend 20 minutes on 20 meters of ground. It's fine. And these are the things that you might like to talk to them about. So when I work with schools and parents, often it's about language, and if a child is at a playground, it isn't okay. Yeah, there is a social element for the adults. That's great. But also you do need to help your child understand the language associated with the movement. So as they're going up, you say, oh, you're going up higher? Okay, and oh, right, you're coming down now. You're going to go under there, oh, through there. Because the great thing about outdoor play is that you can link what children are doing with language. And if you ask any early years educators at the minute, I think two things that have really been badly impacted by the pandemic and lockdown is one, core strength and physical strength of young children, but also language, because the only way you learn a language is to hear it and to be part of the conversation.
That makes loads of sense. I like the idea that, like outdoor play is great because it facilitates other things happening naturally. How do you feel like that's been shaped by the advent of technology and the fact that when people are outside, they might not be chatting to their child as much, or like sort of doing that general interaction, or maybe they're noting down what's happening rather than being present and part of it and doing that sort of, like, has that changed the way that outdoor education works, or changed the way that those skills are built sort of in that interaction?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not just me saying it. Lots of schools and settings are concerned about you'll can see a parent or a carer come to a school or setting. They're on the phone, they meet their child, they stay on the phone, and they leave. And I watch people outside, and you think that's so sad because they're pushing a pram. The pram is facing outwards, so the child can have no conversation with the parent carer. They're maybe on the phone. Yeah, I mean, definitely that opportunity to have just chatting time for some people has gone. And I'm not blaming people. I think all the kind of gadgets that we have, unless you're really on it, can be incredibly addictive. And yeah, even the best of us can become addicted, and you have to kind of become reflective and thoughtful and go, hang on a minute, I've got addicted to this, so I need to stop. Yeah, so and and again, teachers, educators are saying to me that yes, children coming to school who don't have that, don't have a vocabulary. They don't understand how to use a whole sentence. And if you look at, say, the research from Lee in America, the vocabulary you have at 2, that's 24 months old, is a definite indicator of how you will achieve at 11. Yeah. So that vocabulary at 2 is so important. And as you said, a lovely way you said that about outdoor facilitating aspects of the curriculum. I like that. I might have to nick that. It does. You know, if you think, again, I said don't make it complicated, make it simple. Okay, what do we think about when we played outside? It was a social, it was a linguistic, it was an active experience. It's so easy to facilitate language out there in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest memories from childhood is going on nature walks with my grandma, because we didn't really get the opportunity to do that in the environment that we lived in. But when we went to grandma's house, she would take her to pick pussy willow up on it had fallen off trees and put it all in a vase, and we would talk through sort of the shapes of the leaves and draw around them, and that's the stuff that feels a little bit lost. But I do see loads of really good practice around outdoor learning.
Oh yeah.
This is Podcash, brought to you by Cash Alumni. To level up your skills and career, visit our free e-learning resources. You'll find them under the CPD and Best Practice tab of cashalumni.org.uk. That's cashalumni.org.uk.
Are there ways that settings who don't have access to an outdoor space in their setting to support more outdoor learning or bring some of that into their space?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So I think you, again, don't make it difficult, don't make it complicated. You know, I'm lucky I've got a tree outside my window. But yeah, I've worked in places like London and Hackney where there is not a shred of greenery. Is that wrong? Yes. Do we need to campaign for more nature within areas like that? Yes. But it's not coming right now. So the answer is, if you really don't have the ratio, but I would first of all question the motivation. So do the staff feel comfortable working outside? Do they understand it? Are they, do they know you need 2 pairs of socks, 3 pairs of gloves? I remember Margaret Edgington used to have a picture of somebody in a duffel coat and a hat and, looking fairly awful. And she'd go, would you like to look like this? Come and work with young children, sort of thing. So I'd check the motivation of staff, because you can put barriers up if you're so inclined. So that would be my first thing. I think don't make it complicated. Just going for a walk. A head teacher said to me last week, look up, look out. Just get outside and look up. I mean, at the minute, I don't know what it's like in the northeast, but there's a blue sky. I mean, for no other reason, it's just really interesting to look at a completely blue sky and there's an aircraft going past, yeah? So make the most of what you've got, yeah? So that would be one idea. I think if you can't have in and out, then make sure that you all go out at some point, but give the children things to do. And also what I say to staff is, rather than see it as a treat to go out, an event to go out, a playtime. I mean, that's the other thing. People think outdoor play is playtime. God, it's nothing like playtime. Playtimes can be quite horrible. If you ask a teacher when the worst time in a school is, they'll go 1:15 when the children have just come back from playtime, because all sorts of stuff has happened in an environment where they've got very little to do. And even though they have great imaginations, there is a limit to what they can do. I find it almost criminal that we still have playtime that was set up in 1860 whatever, as a break for teachers, and it's pretty much the same. I mean, it's just archaic. So where a setting doesn't have has got problematic ratios, so they can't have in and out available at the same time, I would say don't make outside an event, a happening. Just, I would go out first thing in the morning, and if you've got part-time children, first time in the afternoon. Otherwise, it becomes a boiling pot as children get more and more agitated because they want to go outside. So do it first, and everybody's out there, but everybody's properly dressed. Everybody, it sees it as a simple thing. If you have no access, then try and find somewhere, because there always is somewhere. I mean, I've done outdoor activities in horrible car parks attached to what we used to have as, teachers' centres. But actually, there is still stuff. You'll still find stuff. You're still outside. You're still benefiting from the fresh air. And haven't we proven that, fresh air is quite important to people through this pandemic? Oh dear. How long have we been saying that? But you can still find things to do, and you can honestly, you look on a you look in a car park and there'll be all sorts of plants and things just trying to grow, but there may be litter. Okay, so you've got to teach children, make sure they wash their hands, etc. But there is stuff to do and find out about out there. Yeah. Yeah. Don't know if that answers it.
It does, yeah. That idea of that isn't really a barrier to getting outside, even if you don't have access to your own outdoor space, and sort of making that available, I suppose, to all children rather than just children whose parents can afford to send them to a forest school where they're going to get loads of one-on-one attention and
absolutely
trees and stuff. So outdoor learning isn't just for those sort of forest school spaces. No. It is for everyone, and something that everybody should be accessing regularly.
Yeah.
Is there stuff about outdoor learning and building that in the courses that you've put together for FutureLearn?
Yes. So the two courses for supporting successful learning in primary and secondary schools, and I've put it in both. Yeah, we talk about outdoor education and outdoor play and outdoor learning, and it's the two courses are for support staff in schools, whether secondary or primary, but parents have done the courses, and people who are thinking of returning to some form of education, educational setting, have taken the courses, and across the world. And because of, I suppose, what I've learned about things like people's attitudes and to things like risk, and just to aspects of education, all of that learning that I've learned over the last 40 years, I've kind of put into to these two courses. For example, I've over the years come up against people who've said, "Oh no, it's too dangerous outside. No," or can't have conker fights outside, too dangerous. Oh, you can't go outside. There's ice, and they always blame the health and safety regulations. Well, on the Health and Safety Exec website, it's archived now, but there was this site called Myth of the Month, and they would take something like, "No, we didn't say that you couldn't go outside to play conkers. We didn't ban that. No, we didn't ban children to go outside because of the ice." People's fears of banning things, and it's working with staff and saying, "Yeah, I know you're responsible, and I know that in theory you could be liable, but okay, let's see what policy we can put together to ensure you're as safe as possible." And I've actually seen more dangerous things happen at playtime, and we did a tiny little research project where children were crashing heads and hurting and having to go in because they didn't have enough to do, and yet that's allowed. But then staff concerned about creating an outdoor learning environment for young children because it was supposedly dangerous. So I think people really need to look at the evidence before they make judgments. So in the course that I've written for FutureLearn, there's quite a lot about your own attitude and really reflecting about your beliefs and not trying to block something because you're frightened. and dealing with all of that. And then, of course, there's this whole thing of risk, and I don't like using the word. I think if you use a word like risk, I think as a parent, I would say, excuse me, you want to put my children at risk? So rather than use that language, why don't we use, challenging environments or adventurous environments or fun environments or something other than that? So again, the power of language is extraordinary.
There's something in like putting children in challenging environments to help them to learn how to navigate risk, because the argument is, I suppose, that if when children are set free, they decide to run into each other and bang heads and spend their playtime or their break time sort of where we'll put them in that environment anyway, that actually if they understood the risks or that had those opportunities to do those things in an environment where they were being observed and being supported, and that there was a staff member there to scaffold that play, that they might choose to spend their break times differently.
Well, and also stuff to do. The biggest problem is they just don't have enough to do. Whereas a school down the road, the head teacher allows children to bring their bikes so that they can use their two-wheelers. They have carts and trucks, and they have wild areas. And he's created that within concrete. So he's said, right, okay, this is all concrete, but we're not having that. We're going to change this. And even a tiny space of wooded area. Now, rather than ban it from children, put some bark chippings down and little paths so that they can go and explore and discover. So the other thing through the courses that we've done is just say how. It says primary schools and secondary schools, but it can include any type of setting. It was just that FutureLearn like reasonably short titles to their courses. But we just said, okay, well, what can you do outside? What things can you do outside as a secondary school? What things can you do outside as a primary school? And we posed some ideas, and then what's lovely about the FutureLearn course is you talk to other people that are doing the course, and the social learning. I know people learning from each other is powerful, but I've never seen it happen in action so powerfully as on the FutureLearn courses. It's incredible the way people from all over the world just come together and share ideas and share understanding of their place, their setting, the problems they've got, and then how other people help and try and support and encourage. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, it's great. We saw that we had an event in May around practitioner wellbeing and sort of reframing practitioner wellbeing as being a responsibility, because in my experience, care, health and education professionals are great at looking after other people, but pretty terrible at looking after yourselves. And when you speak to people about why that is, it's because you're quite far down on your own list. So we're trying to reframe that as actually, like, because of the way that self-regulation and co-regulation work, and because of actually how we interact as human beings, if you're not looking after yourself, you're probably doing yourself a disservice in terms of being the best practitioner you can be. And here's all the ways it actually affects you, and here's some stuff you can maybe do differently. But the most powerful part of that event was that the practitioners who came really turned up to network and to chat and to talk about their own situation and their own outlook and things that they could change. And people were sharing some like pretty amazing ideas in that conversation that went alongside the event. And I know what you mean about those sort of MOOCs, those massive online courses where people are joining in those cohorts, because you get to experience so many diverse viewpoints, because people are joining from areas of the world that you haven't experienced, and where actually the rules are different, or the way that people look after children is different in that day to day. So there's so much different practice.
Can I add to that? Because I'm white, I'm a woman. I've very much had a white woman's view of the world, and Western as well. And through things like FutureLearn, and in some ways Black Lives Matters has helped enormously. It's just thinking, okay, I'm in Malawi and education isn't quite as accessible, free at the point of entry, all of that sort of stuff. And you kind of never appreciated that people who might come from other countries might not see outdoor play as important. But sort of an awakening of realising that some cultures see, education is higher if you're in a building with walls and ceiling. If you've got to educate children in your country outside, that's kind of seen as lower. But if you've got a building, walls, ceiling, desks, wow, you've gone up in the world. So it really, FutureLearn, listening, reading people's comments and that has kind of opened my eyes about, yes, don't have your own kind of slightly, I thought I was quite broad thinking, but I had narrowed it, and they've taught me, the learners on there, stuff about their own kind of setting and where something like outdoor play fits within the system, and therefore somebody like me has to make sure that I do keep explaining it to people. And it's a bit like play. I mean, some cultures don't see play as important. Learning is sitting. And again, it's trying to articulate that and continue to articulate it and continue to say, even to the point, I had a colleague saying, a psychologist who works with young children, she has to use the United Nations sort of like right to play with some parents to say, I'm sorry, your child has a right to play. Yeah.
But do you know, I think that part of that is because as adults, like, I don't know, it's like now more than ever, like we've forgotten the value of play for ourselves. Like, my granddad was always tinkering with something or making something, and my grandma was always like playing with new things, like with like crafts or in the kitchen or I suppose in those very, very stereotypical grandparent-y like male and female roles, but they were always playing in their spare time. And whether that was like tinkering on because in those days nobody else did your decorating for you, you did that all, it was your expression of your home sort of thing, like. And so previous generations, I suppose, had to play to figure things out, and we don't so much anymore because we'll just get somebody else to do the things that we don't understand. So we've lost the value of playing. Interesting.
Yeah, you're an interesting person, you are. You're clever. You should probably be doing this interview yourself. Yeah, no, I mean, it's very true that, and I mean, things like obesity, we used to have lawnmowers that you had to push, physically. They were hard going, and you didn't have to sort your core out. They're doing the lawn. If you were lucky enough to have, grass and which we were. Yeah, I think we have, and I think the fact that we have some of these extreme sports, and then you have, organisations now bringing people together to sew or knit or something, or man sheds, all of this sort of stuff. I think that does reflect the fact that we've we've lost sight of doing things for ourselves. I mean, you can buy the ingredients for a meal, and you get them sent to you, and you just follow the recipe. You don't even have to go to the shop. It's like madness.
But it's one of those weird things is that I think it's really easy to get things done or to purchase things from elsewhere, and you sort of weigh up that time cost versus the cost of paying for it and the time that you would spend at work and how much you earn and all those things, and you go, oh, well, actually, like that makes sense because of the time I'm going to spend. But we don't factor into that the stuff that we're losing from not doing those things, because we think about it as just being, actually, what I want from this is to have this meal, or what I want from this is this particular output. But I think that's because we haven't necessarily taken the time to understand the benefits of playing with it and figuring it out, and that like walk to the shop, not just from a physical point of view, but again that event that we did in May, we had there's a gentleman called Dave Wilson who's a Northumberland tour guide but who does a lot of stuff around Wellbeing, and he was explaining, you know, that just going for a walk, because your brain has to take into account where your feet are going and the evenness or unevenness of the ground, and you're keeping your balance and you're doing the things that you're not thinking about that report you've got to get back by 5 o'clock for that thing that you're supposed to be doing, and all of those bits of anxiety sort of disappear for a little while because your brain's doing other. And I think we don't necessarily think about the whole value of the thing, we just think about that output and that metric. So the stuff that we don't measure is often lost. And maybe that's what's happened with outdoor play, that we don't measure those things, so that in those cultures where maybe outdoor play isn't valued as much, maybe that's because when education was standardized or perceived, that actually that stuff just happened naturally elsewhere, so we didn't need to measure it or to put a thing in place for it. Does that make sense?
Indeed, and the trouble with measuring things and having targets is that things that you don't measure and you don't have a target for get lost. So, you know, we're all going, people are going, sort of, personal, social, emotional development, well-being, mental health. Since '89, when the new curriculum came in, yes, okay, there was this sort of very strong vision, but, and then, you know, you had the PSHE curriculum come in and you had SEAL come in and all of that sort of stuff, but it was always, and it still is, isn't it? It's like sex and relationship education. It's still at the kind of bottom, and supposedly anybody can teach it, whereas not everybody can teach, I don't know, maths or something like that sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely think I think we are starting to turn a corner. And for example, here where there's big piece of research going on that is measuring, and Canada's very interested and ahead of us in terms of outdoor education play, and so Scotland's got, you know, a lot happening to do with outdoor education. But here we've got a piece of research that's looking at mental health and adventurous play, or if you want to call it risky play. And what it's saying is that when you're out and actually outside, and I mean the other thing about outside, it just gives you the opportunity to make a noise, be messy, you know, all of those things that it's not quite as easy to do inside. But when you, let's take it for instance, I don't know, you're trying to build something with bits of wood, planks, or whatever, or you've got a hay bale or something like that. And it drops. Okay, so you've worked out that if you've got something that's standing up like this and you put something on the top and the two uprights aren't the right distance for the thing you're going to put on the top, it's going to fall through the hole, or it might fall over the side. That, it doesn't matter, you just learn, and actually what you're learning about is maths and science. Really important stuff. So then you push them closer together and you put the thing on top, and it may fall and it might hit somebody, and we hope that it doesn't hurt anybody, but if you get hurt, you know what getting hurt really means. And it's that kind of uncertainty of doing adventurous play that, and you get a bit of anxiety, with it. You learn sort of bodily, but also mentally, it's an okay place to be. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be not sure, make mistakes. I'm okay about it because I've just tried again. It didn't work. Just tried again. Did work, for example. Or no, that just is too, I can't jump that stream. That's just not in my comfort zone. Felt a bit anxious, uncertain, but that's okay. I know my limit. Because the indication is that if you don't allow children to have that uncertainty, that anxiety when they're younger, and not just on a Friday afternoon because they've got choosing time or something ridiculous like that, but every day having those experiences, They then come to adulthood, and in adulthood, we're faced by a raft of uncertainty and anxiety, whether it's, I don't know, whether you can afford something or you can't afford something, or whether you should get this or that, or think something through. And if you've built up this kind of strength within you to do with uncertainty, you will be able to face it in the future. And what we're finding at university is that students are coming with huge anxieties, and I can't hand on heart go, yep, it's because they didn't do outdoor play, sorted. But my sense is that it's contributed to it, or that aspect of outdoor play where children have to face a problem and see if they can solve it. And even if they don't solve it, it's okay.
Yeah, I've got a theory as to why that might be. Another one of those don't learn something in our grown-up years about ourselves theories. In that when I got involved with farming, again, I've very much been I'm not very good at that, I'll let somebody else do it, and I'll pay someone to do the decorating or do something that is more manual, or rather than like figure it out. And when I got involved with farming, I realised that I couldn't get the lock to close on the gate for one of the fields, and I had to. What do you do about that? If you're the only one there, if you are the farmer, how do you get that gate shut? You can't walk away and leave it because the sheep will all run out, and you can't get someone else to do it because you're the only one there. And the only option is to just keep trying until it clicks, and you keep trying until the lock clicks. And if it takes an hour and a half, it takes an hour and a half. You can't just put it down in frustration and walk away. Okay, well, I'm just going to have to keep trying and figure it out. That was really hard as a lesson, because I suppose you're used to just being able to give up and to be better at something else instead.
Or to ring somebody. I mean, that's the other problem. Yeah. You kind of ring somebody. Yeah, no, I mean, that's a fabulous example of what we need to give children experience of day in, day out. And as I say, I think there is a slight turning of the liner in that, people are now understanding that mental health is, and well-being is linked to how you are just as a person. Yeah. And that, I don't know that we necessarily need to measure it. We just need to hold it up as important as literacy. And literacy is incredibly important. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. So I'm not saying it's either or, but I do think it needs to be there.
But it is much easier to teach children maths and English if they're feeling safe enough to be able to learn.
Yeah.
I think well-being's incredibly important, even if only for those reasons in a school context, but obviously for many reasons besides that. And I think one of the things that helped me in terms of well-being was realising that resilience isn't something that you either have or you have not got, and that actually your school or your employer or your mum or your dad or your carer or whoever it is just as responsible for your resilience as you are, because actually it's about that capacity, that space. So if you've got loads going on, whether they're good things or bad things, like you could be less resilient because you've got less space for something else to happen, or for there to be something that isn't part of that contingency plan or something. So,
and it's not something you necessarily teach either. We're going to learn about resilience today. We're going to learn about mental health. It doesn't quite work like that. And I can give you an example. A project in Oxford that we did and wrote a book called Exploring Outdoors, I think it's called, 3 to 11. So it was about this school that just children went, they were lucky, they did have a little bit of a wood area, and they just went there, every class went there every week. And we went out, even if it was chucking it down. The only thing that really stops you with children and outdoors, or people, is if there's really high winds and it's dangerous. And your sixth sense can tell you whether it's dangerous or not. There is just a feeling your body just goes, if you've been used to being outside, your body goes, no, this is dangerous. You don't really need the weather forecast man to tell you, or woman. Or the other thing is lashing rain, or very, very extreme cold. But we used to go out, and I don't think we ever had a day like.
I would guess, though, Helen, that your idea of lashing rain might be different to some other people's.
Absolutely. Yeah, true. So we went out, but we had the right clothing. We checked that children's feet were warm, their hands were warm, the back of their necks were warm, that they were covered up, they had hoods, etc. And they were completely protected from the weather. And what was super about it, even children and there were some children that clearly had never been out. In the book, there's a young child who's 3. I don't think she'd ever jumped. So Anne worked with her to jump just from a hay bale down to the ground, and her sense of achievement was just like extraordinary when she managed it without any help. But we'd go out regardless of the weather, and we kind of made that decision that we wanted children to see that not that they could beat the weather, but they could work with it, I suppose. And we used to come back from those really cold, wet, windy days, and there was a real sense of euphoria as the children came back in and went, yeah, I did it, sort of thing. And it wasn't on the curriculum, we're now going to teach you resilience, children. It was just there and kind of part of our ethos, I suppose. Yeah. So your idea that, it's easier to teach this than that, I think I agree, but I think it's even more complicated than that, because in some ways I'm not sure it's teachable in the ways that we think of teaching.
Yeah, I think it's that idea that like teaching isn't just the stuff you teach actively, isn't it? There's a lot of passive teaching goes on in that learning environment that, I suppose learning rather than teaching expressly. But yeah, there's lots of different elements that we could do with re-including in some of the ways that we navigate those conversations. Helen, I could talk to you all day, but I know that that's not how either of our working days are supposed to work.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, of course. I was just about to say, so is there anything that you haven't had the chance to say that you would like our audience to know, or that you think is important to add?
I don't know if it's the basic thing is that my head goes all over the place, so I suddenly remember things. You asked about people that don't maybe have an outdoor area or find it, they've just got concrete. Don't despair and don't expect to have trees and everything else. You can still bring logs. You can still get things like wooden offcuts from places like, B&Q and Homebase. They'll give them to you. But you can also get things like hay bales. And if you send the kind of oldest person, send me, and to a garden centre and go, we're poor. We're a very nice, children's centre, or I don't know, whatever, playgroup or whatever, nursery. Would you like to donate some hay bales to us? And probably go for hay rather than straw, because hay is softer. And they're about £4 or £5 each, but 3 or 4 or 5 of those in an outdoor area, they don't last forever, but they do create a very interesting environment for children. And then also a fantastic, I would never have climbing frames or any fixed equipment in an outdoor area. Just forget it. It causes you more problems than it's worth. And I could go on along about that. But, something like a tree that's felled, if you can get the Forestry Commission or somebody to bring you one, that's absolutely super piece of climbing apparatus that isn't too high. Children have to learn that when it's wet, you really don't go on it, because wet wood without a bark is incredibly slippy. But that's fine. They've learned something. So that was just going back to the query about if you've not got if you've just got concrete outside, and you don't have this beautiful environment.
That's been really, really great. Where can people find the courses, we will link them in the description. So if anybody just wants to go to the description, they'll be able to find links to find both of the courses. But can you talk them through where they can find those, so they can?
Yeah, I mean, just Google FutureLearn, and then you then in the search engine, supporting successful learning in schools. And I like the FutureLearn site because it's really simple, and you can just register you don't have to give 20 minutes of your time to registering it. It literally is your name, your email, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's where you find them. And we've just won a bid with FutureLearn to write a 2-week course on sustainability, climate change and schools and settings. And it's very much from the outdoor approach. So there's lots of people going on about climate change and all of that, but this is really okay, and we're outside. So what can we do?
Yeah, that sounds great. We'll signpost to those. Is there anywhere else that you wanted to send anyone?
I mean, you can talk to me on Twitter. I'm not a great user, but I periodically say things that I'm passionate about. I mean, if the books will help, please use the books. The website is there, but I really need to update it. And the other thing is, if people want to email me at work, that's fine. I love it when people contact me and say, I'm doing this, that and the other. And, I'm writing 4 books on child development and outdoors. And I've just finished the first one on physical development. And it's absolutely fabulous when people write and say, I'm doing something really good about ... and I go, right, can you be in the book? Because it's a lot, it's so nice to be going, yep, I can say all this, and here's somebody who's just trying the best they can to do X.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Podcash. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cashalumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and best practice section of the site. That's cashalumni.org.uk.